booktube, welcome back to my channel. Almost unbelievably, more than half of January has already gone by and I'm just getting around to filming my favorites video, but I still wanted to come on here and tell you some of the books that I read last year that I really enjoyed more than others. I had a really great reading year, but some of the books emerged as favorites, some of them quietly. But I wanted to recap them here. I'm not going to go into too much detail about them, but I just wanted to list them and tell you a little something about each one. I read mostly backlist, I suppose, or at least I did last year. But I do have 5 new releases that stood out among the others. And of course, some backlist books that I wanted to tell you about as well. So the 5 favorites that I have from last year that were new releases. The first was The Golden Child by Claire Adam, which I read early in the year. I think I read it in February. And that one was set in Trinidad, and it followed a family that has twin sons, and one of them goes missing, forcing the family to reckon with how they value their children and what they're willing to sacrifice in order to ensure the return of their son. I love the title of the book, which kind of made me think about the story of the golden egg, the goose that laid the golden egg, and you know, how much you're willing to cash in on something that you consider to be valuable, and at what point do you cash in, because when you kill the goose that laid the golden egg, yeah, you get the golden egg, but you also don't have anything else for the future. And I loved the way the author spoke about value, how we value people in our lives, and what if relationships are the most valuable. I don't want to use that word again, but what about relationships that are worthwhile to us? I also love the setting of the book, which reminded me of my own childhood in Jamaica. The fact that the book was set in Trinidad, there's a lot of universality of Caribbean experiences, and I just love the way that the author talked about that setting, that background. The next new release that really stood out to me was The Far Field by Madhuri Vijay, which featured a young woman growing up in India and coming of age, coming to understand the social and political dynamics, some of the differences between Hindus and Muslims, and what has caused some of the unrest in different parts of her country, and why some people treat other groups differently. I love the naivety of the main character. At first it was a little frustrating to see how ignorant she was, but it's as though the author gave us an opportunity as readers to really immerse ourselves into this main character and experience her ignorance with her, and also get a quiet, subtle lesson about the social and political dynamics through this main character's experience. And so even though there was something a little frustrating about the bungling way that the main character handled her own social relationships, it was also this quiet opportunity to learn along with her, and so I really appreciated that. The next new release that really spoke to me was The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth, which is set in Australia but featured a very universal experience in that we're following a young woman who marries into a family and finds her mother-in-law has distanced herself from her, and it's about the levels of estrangement that can exist in a family where people feel like they have to take one person's side over another. It's about the challenges that the son/husband faces, who his alliances are going to be with, whether he sides with his mother or his wife. The mother-in-law dies suddenly and the woman finds herself being blamed for it. While we're reading a mystery suspense, we're also getting a deep exploration of the dynamics within a family and what are some of the challenges that each person faces, how past hurts could affect present situations. I just loved how the relationships were treated, and so even though it had this very unexpected ending, I love the journey to get there. The next new release that I loved was The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which at first I wasn't sure how much I was going to enjoy the story. I felt like the writing style was a little bit journalistic, but as the story continued, I just loved the way that Coates kind of distanced himself from this main character, distanced himself from the story, and we could almost see this main character coming through the pages as a real life person that Coates as a journalist was interviewing. I just love the way the novel became almost a memoir. Story set in slavery, and our main character is a young man whose mother was an enslaved black woman. His father was her slave master. And while that story is not new, what was new about it was the acknowledgement by the slave master, in that he called this young man, this young enslaved boy, he called him his son. He was raised to become his brother's keeper, his legitimate white brother's keeper. And I loved the biblical reference, the biblical connotations that called to mind, and how Coates as an author explored that biblical relationship. What does it mean to be your brother's keeper? What are some of the challenges that one faces when one either accepts or rejects that responsibility? The author also explored the meaning of freedom and slavery through lots of different instances, through lots of different characters. And so even though the book has some magical realism, and we see these characters who are involved in very dire natural circumstances using supernatural abilities to overcome them, that was not the thing that was my favorite about the book. It was the quiet way that the author explored these themes and subjects and gave us these characters with their varying experiences, but all exploring this same question: what is slavery? What is freedom? What does freedom cost? And how far would you go in order to experience your own personal liberty? What are some of the things, who are some of the people that you'd throw under the bus as collateral damage in order to achieve it or not? I like that. Last new release that I read in 2019 that I consider to be one of my favorites was The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys, which is a historical fiction novel billed as a YA because the main characters are 18 and 19 years old, but it didn't read like YA. Maybe that's why I loved it. The story is set in Spain during the period of Franco's dictatorship, and the main characters are a young woman who's grown up under that dictatorial regime, and a young man whose mother is from Spain, but he's grown up in the United States in Texas, and he's visiting Spain where he meets this young woman. And it's through this young man's perspective that we're experiencing the book, in that while his father wants him to join the family business of oil exploration and sales, the young man, Daniel, he wants to be a photojournalist. And when you think about what a photojournalist does, in that they visit these remote locations so that they're physically involved in what is happening, but they're also bringing us kind of a remote perspective, because while they are physically in a place, they're not necessarily being affected by what they're reporting on. And that, I thought, was what the author allowed us to achieve by bringing us into Franco's dictatorship, giving us an eye into what is happening, but also allowing us the freedom to leave when we're ready to leave, to close the book, close the pages, and leave, escape with Daniel, escape with Daniel's family when they return to the United States. I felt that the book was so powerful in the visual representation the author presented through those pages, where she showed us the pictures that Daniel would have been taking. And so I felt like the book's brilliance was in what the author achieved in these visual representations that she brought us through Daniel's lens, showing us through her descriptions what was happening in this country, in this time period, but also giving us this experience from the comfort of where we are, so that we, almost as though we can reach back through the ages and experience it through this young man's tourist visit. And so I love that. As effective as it was, as much of a learning experience as it was to read this book, historical fiction while it was, it felt quiet and moving and important. And so it emerged as a favorite, even though there were flaws in the book. I loved the experience of reading that book. So those are my 5 favorite new releases from 2019. I was going to include my backlist favorites in this video, but baby has other ideas, and the video is getting too long because I just spent too much time talking about these books. They were favorites after all. I'll link in the description box down below if I've spoken about these books in other places. I'll link those videos down below so you could go and hear me talk a little bit more about those books if you're so interested. I'll also link a place where you can buy those books if you're interested. I make Runwright Reads book boxes. I sell them on Etsy. Runwright Reads book boxes are where I curate the experience of reading a book. So you purchase a book box and I'll include a copy of the book with my notes that I have taken from reading the book, as well as gifts that I think will add to the experience of reading. So shameless plug for my own little shop. So those are my favorite new releases from last year. I intend to read a lot of new releases this year because I am going to be judging the BookTube prize again and planning to judge both fiction and nonfiction. So hopefully next year, this time, or maybe a little earlier, I'll have a 2020 new releases video for both fiction and nonfiction. But for now, stay tuned for the next time I'm able to film a video. I'll make my 2019 favorite backlist reads. That's a lot to say. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more. I hope to talk with you in the comments if you've read these books, and whether or not you like them, I'd love to chat with you in the comments down below. So let's talk down there, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.